community. And so when we talk about protection, gender and inclusion, generally now within, just to quickly just explain now in a short form of what it actually means, is talking about protection is addressing violence. That means keeping people safe from harm. So when you just hear the word protection, the first thing that needs to come to your head or mind is that we need to work towards keeping people safe from harm. When we talk about gender and diversity, it works towards addressing discrimination. And so we need to understand the different needs and risks for the different people within the communities that we seek to serve. Of course, on issues of inclusion, we're also addressing exclusion. And this talks about involving and engaging excluded people. And more often than not, you will realize people who may be excluded at times are persons with disability, persons with disabilities, the elderly, people from minority groups. And so it is working towards ensuring our target groups, that the people we are targeting to reach out to with our activities, need to ensure that no one is being left out in this particular process. And that of course means working also with the community members and the community leaders and the different community groups to be able to ensure that no one is left behind at the end of the day. When we talk about PGI within IFRC and within the National Society, it falls under Strategic Priority 5, which is Values, Power and Inclusion. And I'm sure most of you have seen this towards the planning of your yearly plans. You've been able to see where we fall under. And so we have two specific outcomes, that is outcome 5.3 and 5.4, which talk and address on issues of national societies and IFRC Secretariat adopting a comprehensive PGI approach across operations and programs. And that's why we are here today, because we would want to ensure that even as we address issues of CVA, that you're also sensitive on PGI as part of the integration or comprehensive PGI approach within everything, within all the operations that the National Society has. Of course, the other outcome is national societies and the IFRC Secretariat lead by example and inspire others on gender and diversity. We've talked about gender and diversity before in terms of the terminologies. So we're just supporting, continually providing technical support to national societies and also IFRC to lead by example and also to make sure that they inspire others. And we also address issues of gender and diversity at the end of the day. You realize that PGI is not a standalone. It's one of those things that we work towards integrating across different sectors. We have it included within health, within accountability, but also within other sectors, including WASH. And now that we have cash as a tool, it's one of the things we're also working towards ensuring that we include PGI under that. And of course, a contextualized understanding of the social inequalities. So when you're looking at PGI, we're looking at understanding the social inequalities that are driving cause for exclusion and protection risks. It also looks at covering the humanitarian and development action based on the national society's presence before, during, and after a disaster or crisis. So you realize we encourage national societies to not look at PGI at the implementation phase, but to look at PGI from a process of to look at PGI being included or being considered at the start, or even just even before a crisis happens, during the crisis, and of course after the crisis. And when you look at today's checklist, you're going to see this particular process where we're going to be looking at what to consider before you implement, even at the project design, during implementation, of course, and of course during monitoring and evaluation and post-distribution. In terms of, I've just lost my, it's okay. Sorry for that. Thanks. Let me take control. Sorry for that. Great. Yeah. So when you talk about PGI, some of the things you're also going to realize, or some of the words you've had being mentioned during PGI, when talking about issues of PGI, is dignity, access, participation, and safety. And this is what we call the protection principles, and we call them the DAPS. We call it a DAPS approach. So when we are trying to explain to people how to implement PGI and how to go about PGI, we talk towards ensuring that the dignity of those that we seek to serve is being adhered to, that we need to work towards ensuring that whatever activities we're doing, whatever services we're providing, they get to look into issues of the dignity of the communities that we seek to serve and ensure that we uphold their dignity at the end of the day. On issues of access, we get to ensure that at the end of the day, the people we are seeking to serve within the community are able to access our services with ease, that at the same time, they're able to access our particular services with a lot of safety. Like they're able to get to where we are in terms of providing this particular service, that they have the ability to be able to access this particular service, especially for people with disability or the elderly, and also children at the end of the day. And so we need to work towards ensuring that all our services are accessible at the end of the day. On issues of participation, it's ensuring that there's meaningful participation, not just any participation, but meaningful participation by all people within the community. So if you're seeking to have a project or implement an activity within the community, it is important that you get to hear the voice of different community members, because different people are affected differently. And so it's always important for us to get their feedback on how they are being affected, what are some of the solutions they may have for this particular, for whatever particular issue that may be facing them within the community, but also having their voice heard, but also their input put into consideration. When we talk about participation, we do not mean that you have women in a room and within your records you say that 20 women attended a forum, but you are not able to give them a platform to speak. It is you inviting them for this particular forum, but also providing for them an opportunity to be able to air their to be able to speak, to be able to say what they're going through, but also to feel that they actually are, whatever it is that they're actually speaking is being put into consideration. And more often than not, based on different issues or different cultural issues within the community, you may have to have different sessions for the men and the women, for the boys and the girls, just to be able to provide a safer space for them to be able to speak out. On issues of safety, it's looking at what it is that we are providing for these particular communities. And on issues of CVA, you will hear a lot about issues of safety, looking at ensuring that when we are providing a particular service to the community members, that this particular service we're providing, one, is safe, two, they're able to access it in a very safe way, and three, even as they continue to utilize this particular service, it's a service that they can be able to feel safe even as they continue. And so you will hear a lot about issues of DAPs. We call them DAPs, but generally they stand for dignity, access, participation, and safety. Within PGI, we address different themes, or rather we focus on different themes. One is disability inclusion, looking towards ensuring that persons with disabilities are included within our day-to-day work. Persons with disability are considered in terms of getting their feedback. Persons with disability are considered in terms of making decisions that are affecting them within the community. We also have issues of sexual and gender minorities, which you also address. We have issues of child protection, which also tags along child safeguarding, and I'm sure you've all heard of these terminologies. Looking at what activities do we have? Are these activities affecting children directly or indirectly? And what do we have in place to ensure that children are protected at the end of the day? We also have issues of sexual and gender-based violence, working towards prevention and response of sexual and gender-based violence. What activities do you have in place? How is your particular program addressing issues of SGBV? What is it that you're looking out for? Because we would want you to work towards more of prevention as opposed to treating the same. We would want you to work towards more prevention again, and also what mitigation measures do you have in place to address issues of SGBV? Then we also have gender equality. We have issues of racism, harassment, trafficking in human beings, and education, and much more. And all these themes are all fall under PGI, or in one way or another are linked to PGI. In terms of emergency operations, so in terms of how we operate, in emergency operations, PGI activities focus on mainstreaming in all the sectors. Remember, I said it's not a standalone. We work towards ensuring that there's integration of PGI within all sectors. And of course, we also work towards having more specialized activities that protect people at risk of harm due to who they are. And so at times you will find us deploying PGI experts or providing technical support to national societies within the different plans of actions that you have or within the different drafts that you're able to provide. In long-term plans, we focus to have PGI programs that are more expansive, of course, addressing issues of sexual exclusion in a more systematic and sustainable manner. And so we work towards ensuring that we lobby and have projects in place that have more long-term PGI programming, and that way we are able to integrate PGI within the National Society work. Important to note is that PGI is everyone's business. It's not just one person's business. It's not just the focal point's business. It's everyone's business. But we are aware that not everyone has the competence, knowledge, or experience to ensure PGI is done. However, from where you sit, it will be good for you to take the next step in terms of either reaching out to us or reaching out to your National Society focal points to be able to get the right information or the right assistance in terms of how to respond to PGI issues. But we would want you to take it as a responsibility upon yourselves also, even as you implement, because when you look at issues of PGI, it's something that you deal with or are finding within your different projects that you're implementing, or within the different activities that you have in the field. And in one way or another, you will have a PGI issue being addressed. And it's always good to be able to know how to address this, and not just assume that since you don't have the expertise, it cannot be you to respond to it, that you'll wait for someone else to come and look at the problem to be able to address it. As we come to a close in terms of a brief introduction of what PGI is, we have different approaches that support our work. We have different documentations that support our work. We have a child safeguarding policy, which was done in 2021. These are materials we can share with you, we'll share with you for those who do not have PGI focal points within your national societies. We also have a PGI strategic framework on gender and diversity issues for 2022-2025. We, of course, have a gender and diversity policy that was developed in 2019. We have our PSEA policy that was developed in 2019 too. We have the Violence Prevention and Mitigation Response Framework, which helps us a lot in terms of addressing issues of violence. We have the community engagement and accountability approaches. Remember, CEA and PGI work very closely. And so what CEA does, what PGI does, these are some of the things that we work on together. And so you will find these particular approaches within that. And then also we do have the screen has just gone.
I'm just putting it back on, then you can breathe.
It's okay. We have the Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Joint Action on Prevention and Response Resolution for 2015, which helps us address issues of SGBV. Remember, we've said that SGBV is something that we work towards ensuring that we prevent there's prevention on sexual and gender-based violence, and that means that we need to know how best to address this within our different activities that we're having within the community. We also have the IAS guidelines on inclusion of persons with disability. This is one of the things that has really been requested for across board within the different national societies on issues of inclusion of persons with disability. How do we ensure inclusion of persons with disability? And of course, we do have a guideline that supports us in that, but we also continue to provide technical support to national societies who would want to learn more on disability inclusion. One of the documents that is not here is the minimum standards for protection, gender and inclusion, a very important document that supports our national societies to ensure that they mainstream or integrate PGI within their work. And this provides very clear minimum guidelines for you to use within your different sectors and addresses issues of dignity, access, participation, and safety. Next, we do have some resources that are very beneficial for you. We will be sharing this presentation with you after this, and since these are some of the resources that we can recommend that you get to have a look at if you would want to learn more on PGI, but also to mention that IFRC already has an online training on PGI, a 1-hour online training on PGI for anyone who would want to learn more on PGI and get to understand more on PGI and even how they can utilize or work towards ensuring that they integrate PGI within their work. So that's just a short nutshell on what PGI is. I don't know that there are any questions within the chat box so far. But feel free to raise any questions that you may have in terms of PGI, and we'll be able to respond to them. Over to you, Maja.
Thanks so much, Maureen, for that thorough yet very fast rundown. We have someone in the chat who's not muted. If you can mute yourself, please. Different languages and everything. All right. So the intention of what I'm going through on cash and voucher assistance today is not to go through the very theoretical background. We did in the meeting invite send out a link to a recording made of me doing that kind of presentation in another session. So if you haven't seen it and you don't have experience with cash and voucher assistance, I'd highly encourage you to go to that. So we'll share that in the links as well. And there's various other online trainings that you can access also that we can also send a link to. But just to be very sure, before I start talking about PGI and CVA, that we're all on the same page, let's just put up the standard definition of what it is. So cash and voucher assistance is one of the key terms that we are working with, and it refers to all the programs where we are providing cash or vouchers to people rather than giving them in kind or as a complement to in kind. It's not a standalone thing. And it's for people to access goods or services directly themselves. So with cash, they would go and pay for what they need. With a voucher, that would be either a paper or an electronic voucher. They can access what they need at specific places, but there's still some restrictions to it. Whereas a multi-purpose cash grant, as we typically call it, gives people more free access to define their own priorities. Using cash and voucher assistance doesn't exclude the need for PGI considerations in programming, even though there are some aspects that we are maybe leaving a little bit more up to people themselves, depending on the context and the way we can deliver cash to them. We still have a responsibility, and it's really, really important that we uphold that, and also that we ensure that our programming doesn't create any new risks for people as a result of us distributing cash and voucher assistance. So we have a massive majority of our national societies in the Africa region now using cash and voucher assistance modalities and looking to scale this because it is a very efficient and very dignified way of responding to people's needs. But as I said, it is incredibly important that we are PGI sensitive in this, and I'm going to take you through a few pointers, and then the checklist in itself should really also be a tool for you to get a good understanding of what is it that we mean and where is it we want to get at with all of this. So the first I want to address is that we need to move away from thinking PGI as a metric. It's not about how many people that are women that we are targeting, or how many people are disabled or living with a disability that we are targeting, or how many are old, or how many are identifying as another gender or whatever. It's not about that percentage in targeting. You can have 100% target of women without being PGI sensitive. So it's really important that we take that thinking and start thinking about how can we ensure participation and empowerment through our programming. And this, of course, doesn't just apply to CVA programming, but it's a really important aspect when we're looking at cash and voucher assistance or interventions using that. So that's a very graphic introduction to that part. We primarily start by looking at minimizing the risk. So that should always be a minimum requirement in any of our programs, that we are minimizing risk, we are mainstreaming protection. And I'm just going to give a few examples here of how that could look. So one aspect could be, for example, to look at the different modalities, so cash, voucher, in kind, and the different delivery mechanisms. So that could be mobile money or banks or cash in hand or, again, a voucher, and see, can we, through the way that we are designing our programs, can we actually address some of the protection risks, and can we look at diversifying this for specific groups? So, for example, a person living with a disability might not have a preference for cash because they can't access the market. So do we have the option of delivering something to their home, or how can we help that person to still get access to goods by us giving them cash? We can look at how much money are we giving people at the same time? And this can go either way. It might be that people say, well, I like to get a small amount every month because that way I can keep the cash safe. I'm not holding on to so much, so I'm not at risk. Or in other settings, people might say, well, I prefer to get just one big amount that I collect once every 3 months or every half year, because I have it's difficult for me to go to the payout point or distribution point to collect the money. So I really prefer getting a higher amount, and then I can find a way to keep it safe. And again, this might vary across groups. If we are putting in those variations, of course, we have to check how we are communicating about it. But typically, these are quite easy questions to put into our needs assessments, for example, or already at the feasibility stage, ask people, do you prefer getting more money, fewer times, or do you prefer to get a smaller amount multiple times? And then, of course, explaining to them that in the end, it adds up and it's the same amount that they would get. A key important point that is related to both protection and dignity is, of course, making sure that our distribution point location is close enough to people. So it's both for an actual distribution, but even if you're using financial service providers, make sure that that payout point is also close enough that they can access it safely and within a reasonable amount of time. And then, as the example that I gave with people living with a disability before, maybe we have at-home delivery for some people. So I have seen programs where they did actually have like a digital transfer mechanism, but maybe they had like 10 households where they would go and they would actually give people cash in hand in their home because they didn't have access to the payout point. So the mitigation and our protection mainstreaming is, and I think that's quite clear from what Maureen has shared with us, it is something we see as being compulsory in any intervention that's using cash and voucher assistance. And really just to say, we want to ensure that we don't increase the risk of, for example, gender-based violence or other protection risks as a result of our program. We want to make sure that our interventions are also potentially reducing the risk of exposure for some groups. And we are looking at including awareness, protection, inclusion, gender, GBV, all of that awareness. We need to plug that into our programming. And we do that best by setting up a PGI analysis at the beginning of our program. And the PGI analysis in itself is also what is ensuring that we have meaningful participation in our programming. And then again, a reminder, this is something we're looking at for all projects and programs and throughout the project cycle. And I think Maureen also said that very clearly, so not to spend too much time sending a reminder on this. This is, again, reinforcing that we don't want to introduce new risks. It's incredibly important, and there's been many programs where we've seen new types of risks coming out as a result of shifting to cash or voucher assistance without doing these kind of analysis or without having the right type of conversations with communities. So this could also be, for example, be tension at the household level, or it could be tension at the community level. So it's not necessarily such that those risks would not be present in a setting where we were giving in-kind assistance, but it is just something that is really growing with the whole cash portfolio and the accountability measures that we take within that as well, that the protection and gender and inclusion is becoming a really important part of our programming. I'm just going to check. Someone is not muted. Can you please mute yourself? We also encourage that we do increasingly take our analysis and we put in what we call complementary activities to also, so both to mitigate those protection risks that are there, and to some extent we might even take it into prevention and response activities depending on the capacities that a national society has. And in the end, it's really to make sure that we facilitate and we monitor the safe access that people have to services, including a potential distribution that we are setting up. All right, so I'm gonna try and give an example. So I'm talking about minimizing risks. I also want to talk about maximizing benefits, and related to this, saying a little bit about where we have a lot of assumptions that are not necessarily manifesting unless we incorporate those specific activities that can help maximize the benefits. It doesn't necessarily always happen on its own. So here I put up, we're looking at a cash or a voucher assistance program with the objectives that we are meeting basic needs. And we've decided to target the women, people living with disabilities and elderly as primary recipients of the support that we're providing. In meeting basic needs, we have usually the objective that coping strategies are changing, hopefully for the positive, that people are reducing especially damaging coping strategies, and of course food security is increasing. What we then come at here is we then come with all our assumptions. So we typically say, oh, but if coping strategies are changing, that means that there will be a decrease in risk. And for example, if we're looking at it from the perspective of women or someone who's more vulnerable in the home, we very often assume that because people have their basic needs met, we somehow also can address things like domestic violence. And this is not the case. Like very rarely we'll actually see that this would just happen on its own, because I think all of us know that this is something that's quite ingrained in some of the communities that we're working with. We also have assumptions that by targeting those who are more vulnerable, so here again, targeting women, for example, as the primary recipient, we think that because they get the cash in hand, they also have increased decision making at the household level and that they have the control over their own cash. And very often surveys where we are actually discussing this with communities have actually shown us that this is not the case. Sometimes it is. And of course, it also depends on the whole situation for the household. But we can build in smaller activities. We can make sure that even though we are targeting women as primary recipients, the men are engaged in the dialogue that we have. We are putting in our communications that this is a cash grant that's intended for the household to consume, etc., etc. And all of this are things that are put in the checklist as small activities you can integrate into your programming. They're not necessarily costly. It's maybe just an issue of training volunteers in how are they engaging with households on specific issues, and ensuring that they also know how to monitor it. Another assumption that we have with our targeting is that people have safe access to markets, to services and financial service providers. And this also very often is something showing that we can't just assume that. We have to check that all the groups we're working with have that safe access. So we always need to build it into our assessments, make sure that those questions are there. We don't do any needs assessment without asking protection questions. And some of them go beyond what we're used to from the community engagement and accountability questions, but of course it very often links very closely. But really pay attention to what are the questions we are asking around PGI in our assessments and how are we using that data, because those assumptions, the 4 red bubbles on the screen right now, that's not things that happen on their own. We have to take that data and figure out, okay, what additional cash plus complementary activities, what additional awareness, what small tweaks here and there can we make in the design so that we actually reach that target that we have in terms of creating safe access and maybe changing also our target groups' influence on the household level. Decrease in domestic violence is a bit more difficult. It's quite challenging, but maybe at least we can learn how to deal with it if we see a high prevalence of it in our programming. It's just small tips and a quick overview. We don't have a full training to do this, so I hope it at least gives you a little bit of inspiration on some of the things you have to think about in your programs. So I don't think Maureen said so much about the referral pathways, and I'm just putting it in here as a reminder to everyone that we do expect that all staff and volunteers that are engaged in programming knows what a referral pathway is. And ideally, you've mapped out what are the different referrals that are available in the context where you're working. So where do we refer someone reporting SGBV, where do we refer a child protection case, but also where do we refer nutrition and health cases, for example. So super important that those that are out there and engaging, both at the assessment, implementation, monitoring stage, know how do I deal with this. So here is a very generic referral pathway related to GBV. So this is an example. Hi, hello, I'm a volunteer. I'm here with the Danish Red Cross in your community collecting data. We sit down, we talk. Someone is telling me that she's been exposed to violence in her own home. I, as a volunteer, I look, I listen, make sure to be very respectful, no promises, but you of course tell the person you're talking to that anything you're telling me about this, I of course will keep it confidential. I believe in everything you're telling me right now, and I'm willing to take your case further, but let me just check how I do that, because I'm not the expert, right? I've learned from my training as a volunteer that I need to understand the referral pathway. So I start thinking, do I actually know this? Or I take out that piece of paper or whatever that it is that I'm carrying around. If the referral pathway is available, I immediately follow that and make sure that the GBV survivor can understands where are the services that that person can access. And if they need either you to go and refer them directly or want you to accompany them, it's very important that they give their consent for you to follow them or follow up on their case. And again, you report back and say, I can't help solve your case. I can help send you to the right place where someone else can. If there's no referral pathway available, which is the case in some contexts, we try to understand so much as we can about the case, but it's really important that someone who's not trained on case management is not starting to do case management. So here it's trying to really map out what are the different services available. And we don't take record or anything of this. You might get a phone number so you can call back if you figured out that there was something specific of a service you weren't aware of, but that's it. And you maintain confidentiality. So it's not like you're going home to your boss and you're saying, oh, I just talked to Maja down in number 5 on this street and she reported this to me. What should I do? Keep it confidential. So just a good reminder, and in context where GBV referral pathways and other referral pathways related to protection are available, of course, make sure that volunteers are trained on the actual referral pathway. So not this generic stuff that I've put up here. For you to follow afterwards, I put in, so the slides include links on 2 mobile apps that are very good. So one is the GBV Pocket Guide, which among other have that generic referral pathway, and it gives really good information to someone who is in the field and taking in data, who might experience something like this and doesn't know what to do. That app will sort of take you through the pathway of what do I do next. Rosa is another mobile app, which is very good and has various information on GBV and other protection issues. So highly encourage that these are something to be downloaded if you're, or to download for volunteers or something, so they have something to access and learn more in the field, besides, of course, from the links that we have from Maureen. All right, so that's what I will give you before we jump over to the checklist. So we are keeping note of questions in the chat. We might take some of them directly, and otherwise we'll try and take them in the Q&A after. And meanwhile, we have Maureen jumping in and just showing us, giving us a tour of the checklist, what's in it, and giving us a few examples, I think. So Maureen, please take over the screen share, if you will.
Thank you very much, Maja, for that. Allow me to share my screen.
And I'll just, in the meantime, I'll drop the link to the checklist as well. And please know that this is a draft. We are still open to your comments and feedback, but I'll drop the link so you can also access it and open it on your own computers. Yes, go ahead, Maureen.
Great. Thank you, Maja. I know there's some questions already within the chat box, so I'll be able to respond to them during the Q&A session. And maybe some of them I'll respond even as I continue sharing the checklist. So we shared this with you some time back, just for you to have a look at in terms of what we've developed as our draft checklist to ensure PGI-sensitive CVA. Why we developed this particular tool is to ensure that interventions using CVA are sensitive to PGI within the design, the implementation, and also the monitoring. When you look at this particular checklist, it's overly structured towards the protection principles of dignity, access, participation, and safety, what I was talking about initially. And so we are trying to work towards looking at what it is that we are working on in terms of CVA, but also ensuring that it's PGI sensitive at the end of the day. So it's a tool that we've developed that has about 9 pages inclusive of the introduction on what it is that you'll need to look at. But we have 2 different sections in terms of what to look at. We have the minimum measures and also we have the advanced measures. Ideally, this particular tool that we have, the checklist that we've developed, we aim to have it being utilized by the national societies, IFRC, and also the partners, but specifically request that it be filled by the PGI and the CVA focal points who are with us today, but also working closely with the CEA focal points. Remember, we said that we do have checklist that is also developed with the CEA team. So we have a CEA and a CEA and CVA checklist that we've developed. Of course, that touches a lot of issues of on issues of PGI, specifically on issues of meaningful participation. But also, as you're working towards filling this particular checklist, it will be good for you to work closely with your CEA focal point on ground, with your CVA focal point, and also with your PGI focal point. That way, you're able to provide a really good checklist. And in terms of areas maybe you may not be able to understand, or areas that you need more information, within the 3 of you, 1 of you is able to provide this particular information. Like I mentioned earlier, we do have some 2 areas or 2 sections. One is minimum measures and the other one is on advanced measures. So for minimum measures, generally the minimum measures will apply where we're looking at all types of projects using CVA modalities. It's also going to apply where you're actually feeling this prior to our response and as part of cash preparedness activities. Also looking at it in terms of the early stages of a response where you have a response that is already coming on board. So you can fill this particular checklist, especially on the issues of within the minimum measures at that particular point. They can also be utilized during the smaller emergencies with a shorter time scale, which is more or less than 6 months. And also where there's limited experience in PGI in national societies. Within the advanced measures, this is a point where you do have PGI capacity. There's also maybe a PGI surge capacity, or you do have a PGI experienced staff within the national society was a good level of understanding. It can be used later in the response and can be used for larger or protracted emergencies with a longer time scale. So this is the checklist itself, how it looks like. Of course, you'll fill out in terms of the date of filling. When you actually filling this particular checklist, you'll indicate the national society, the particular project you're going to be filling information based on that particular project, stage of the project cycle. Where are you at? Are you at the start, the design, the implementation, or in the monitoring stage? So what we've done for you, whatever we shared with you early in the week, is one that we have tried to fill out with some examples for you to just see how to fill it. However, when you're filling this particular checklist, you will not have these particular examples. The examples will be deleted. So the final document you're going to be sharing with you will not have these particular examples, but this was just to help you see how you can be able to fill it out.
Or we'll leave the examples and you delete them yourself. So it's there for inspiration when you're filling it in. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. So we do have a scorecard. In terms of scoring, we have 4 ways in which you can score yourself. One is achieved, which stands, A stands for achieved. We have PA, which stands for partially achieved. We have the first NA, which stands for not achieved. And the second NA stands for not applicable. What we have done initially, we had this in terms of having all the names as achieved, partially achieved. So we've changed this to just having the acronyms, so you can also shorten the entire document and not make it look too intimidating. So when you're filling this particular tool, or rather this particular checklist, the first part you'll start with is the PGI analysis. We've talked about the importance of having a PGI analysis or carrying out a PGI analysis. This will help because this forms the backbone of protection mainstreaming and risk mitigation. And it's important that it's undertaken and to inform the design, the implementation, and also monitoring. Remember, you want to make sure that you reach out to people with their specific needs and reach out to the right people and not leave out anyone who may be at risk of being left out based on their age, disability, gender, and other issues that may arise. So, for example, when you're looking at PGI analysis, in terms of the minimum measures, we have the PGI analysis should ensure to collect and analyze data in SAD, that is sex, age, disability, disaggregated data, on needs, priorities, and capabilities relating to CVA, and apply this throughout the project cycle. So what we've done is also explained to you why this is important, because we do realize we may not all national societies have the capacity on PGI, and so it's important for us for you to understand why this is important, so that even as you get to score yourself and provide a justification of that particular score, you have a background information on why this is important. So for this particular example, we went with achieved, meaning that this has already been done. And in terms of justification, we are able to explain that the needs assessment collected data in SAD, that is sex, age, and disability disaggregated data, and a few questions were included on PGI. However, a specific PGI analysis was not conducted and the PGI team was not included. So you realize at times for national studies who do not have PGI focal points, you may not have one expertise in terms of conducting a major PGI analysis. However, we have provided below there and also within the CEA checklist some questions that can be included in the different assessments that you do have. And so with those particular questions, you're able to say that when you're doing your assessments, you are able to include a few questions within the assessments. And this can help cover that, cover under the minimum measures. Then of course, within advanced, it talks about employ appropriately trained staff to conduct PGI analysis in communities where CVA is implemented, so activities can be designed and implemented accordingly. Advocate and work through current power structures in the communities for PGI throughout the project cycle. Support from religious figures, leaders, and all men in communities is pivotal for the change that everyone envisions. So you realize that as part of the humanitarian duty to do no harm, we must incorporate PGI aspects in all steps of our programs. So why we're doing this, or why we're asking these particular questions under the advanced, is to encourage that you also have a PGI staff in place who understands and supports towards carrying out a PGI analysis. But when you do carry out this particular analysis, you're able to understand the needs of the community. You're able to understand who is within this particular community, and it helps you in your design in terms of how you're going to go about CVA, in terms of what providing CVA, how you're going to go about it. And this also really supports in the process. That's why we do have both minimum and advanced within this particular phase. So what you realize is that we've broken down the checklist into 4 different sectors. The first is PGI mainstreaming and risk mitigation, whereby we have a few checks and balances that you need to look into just to confirm where you are at, and also to score yourself in terms of whether you are at partially achieved, not applicable, or achieved. We do hope that with time, even as you continue filling this particular checklist, we will find ourselves getting to achieved at the end of the day. Initially, you may start from not achieved because you may not have the expertise to be able to get there. But with time and with a lot of systems being put in place, you will find yourself getting to the level of achieved. So under PGI mainstreaming and risk mitigation, we have the PGI analysis, we have the risk mitigation measures, we have CVA, PGI and CEA staff engagement. Remember, we've said we're encouraging participation of the 3 staff within the National Society to support in this particular process. And so collaboration is required or encouraged so that both the 3 teams can be able to work together and be able to enhance a better PGI-sensitive CVA as well as a CEA and CVA. They're able to address the same in a very good way. Of course, issues of data protection, and like that someone already has asked in terms of issues of data, how it is that you're collecting PGI data, what are the tools in place to be able to collect this particular data, and how we're going about in terms of analyzing the data itself. So you look at data protection, we have issues of within the minimum measures. We're saying consider personal data protection and the risks of sharing beneficiary data with government and or private sector and incorporate data protection principles. Remember, we said we're looking towards ensuring DAPs, dignity, access, participation, and also the safety. And also safety falls under this in terms of data protection. Then consider the risks for specific groups. What are some of the groups that you've identified in the communities that are at need and at risk of being left out? How are you addressing any risks of these particular specific groups within the community? Do you have it in place in terms of who is in the community, who is at risk, and what it is that you're working towards? We talked about issues of SGBV. Where we're talking about don't share data that may be linked back to a group or an individual, including survivors of SGBV. And Maja has taken us through the referral pathways, but also addressing issues of a survivor-centered approach. So within data protection, we have provided with you some minimum measures that you need to look into. And when it comes to your scoring, you can pick where you are at in terms of within the National Society. Where are you at? Are you at partially achieved? Are you at not achieved? Are you at achieved? And within this particular example, we provided justification of National Society uses the Red Rose as a data management platform. All volunteers are trained on data protection. Tablets are collected by staff after data collection and never kept at volunteers' homes. You can provide more information, especially if you work with the CEA focal point. They can be able to provide more justification for this particular response in terms of information collected from the community, in terms of feedback from the community. How is this particular feedback stored? How is this particular feedback relayed upwards and also back to the community? This can be some of the things you can be able to work around. Also, staff and volunteers also being trained on survivor-centered approach, as well as them being trained on prevention in response to SGBV, can be some of the justifications that you can provide under this. And of course, we have issues of training of staff and volunteers, which is very important. Staff and volunteers need to be trained on PGI, CEA, and data protection. And that's why we're saying you need to work with the 3 team members to be able to identify some of these gaps that may come about. And once you identify these particular gaps, you can start working on some of these particular issues so that it can help you even as you continue filling this particular checklist, even for other projects that you now have, you're now confident enough even as you fill this particular checklist in terms of capacity on ground. And then, of course, we have the protection principles. We have dignity. We have access, we have participation, and we have safety. Just to address one of the sectors within dignity, we will look at the dignity items. In terms of the minimum measures, dignity items should ideally always be included in the cash transfer value or distributed as a complementary in-kind contribution. So you're confirming that this is being done, or you're ensuring that you are considering to be able to do this within your project. Then include dignity items culturally appropriate to a given context in market assessments and market monitoring. So why we need to do this is because you need to ensure that women and girls' needs are met in any intervention using CVA. So you're going to confirm whether this is being achieved or partially achieved or not achieved. An example of a justification is that the National Society engaged in the National Cash Working Group to ensure that dignity items were reflected in the minimum expenditure basket. So this is all under dignity. So under dignity, you'll have appropriateness of CVA. You will have dignity items, which has now the minimum measures. It does not have the advanced measures. We have issues of within access. We have feasibility of CVA. That's the delivery mechanisms. How are you delivering CVA? We look at the minimum measures. What are the how are you engaging in terms of efforts to identify persons or groups who may not have access to some delivery mechanisms, e.g. some groups might lack ID or do not own mobile phones. Some groups may not be able to get themselves to where you are at to be able to register or be identified and be considered within this particular program. So what also issues of strategies must be developed to ensure safe access for all. That's mitigation measures might be to utilize different delivery mechanisms. So you'll need to look at your remember different communities, different ways of working, different ways of response. So you need to work towards ensuring that you have strategies in place and you've developed these particular strategies to ensure that there's safe access for all. And not assuming that what you used in community A can also apply in community B. You will need to work towards identifying who is within the community you're responding to, how you're responding to them, and what are the strategies that you have in place to ensure that they are safe. And at the same time, they're also able to access the services that you're offering. Then, of course, we have access to receive assistance. So when we look at issues of access to receive assistance, you have some minimum measures in place. What's the selection criteria? I know someone had asked about the selection criteria in terms of beneficiary identification, how to work towards beneficiary identification. What I would recommend is that you work closely with the community members to identify who is where, but also be able to do a gender and diversity analysis to understand who is within this particular community and how are these particular different groups within this particular community being affected.
Just a couple of minutes. Just a couple of minutes.
Sure. So we do have that under access. And of course, under access, you also have safe access to markets and services. We also have safe access to financial service providers, which is what CVA is also looking at in terms of you ensuring that you have financial service providers, but also that the services that financial service providers are providing are accessible and safe. We do have issues of communication. And under this, when you look at the CEA and CVA checklist, you will see issues of communication, which also links to this particular checklist and also links to the checklist within CEA. Issues of SGBV have also been addressed under this. And of course, issues of participation. And all these points below under participation are all captured under CEA in CVA checklist. So there's a link. As you can see, there's a lot of collaboration ongoing, but there's also a lot of linkage that is coming between CEA and CVA, as well as PGI-sensitive CVA. And under participation, all this is looking at issues of targeting. Who are you targeting in the community? How are you doing this particular targeting? Consultations, complaints and feedback mechanism, and such like things. And we've been able to provide to you some justifications that can support your scoring, but also some explanations as to why this is important and why you need to be able to do this. On issues of safety, we're looking at distribution of safety points. We're looking at household tensions, which is very key. We're looking at issues of child protection, which are also very key. And you should be able to then look into these advanced and minimum measures, get to understand why this is important before you get to do your scoring. And once you do your scoring, be able to provide a very good justification as to why you've scored that way. We have several annexes that we've also provided for you that will support with your response, but also with your activities. One is the related tips and preconditions to PGI-sensitive CVA. So we provided a very good explanation and background under this to support you in terms of the checklist, but also within your work. We provided some very good tips on cash complementary and integrated protection activities. This mainly works towards the advanced programming, what it is that you need to look into, or what it is that you need to confirm that you're actually doing, so that you're able to say that you have PGI-sensitive CVA. Then under this, we also have the third annex, which is the IFRC gender marker vetting form, which is very important. It's a very good vetting form for you to be able to utilize, and very straightforward in terms of filling it, where you're just going to read and gauge yourselves in terms of whether it is a yes or a no. And from that, you're able to see where you are at in terms of grading, whether you're at the harmful level, neutral, sensitive, responsive, or transformative level. And of course, it continues to provide you an opportunity to provide more information in terms of justifications for your responses. And last but not least, we do have some references in terms of what we've utilized to be able to come up with this particular checklist. I know I have been quite fast in terms of going through it, but our expectation or assumption is that most of you have been able to open this particular tool, this particular checklist. You've been able to go through it. And particularly today, you'll be able to provide for us feedback on whether this particular checklist is important, whether it's something that we can continue to utilize, and what are some of the things that we would need to look into even as we continue and preparing to launch it for the national societies to be able to use. Thank you for this. Any questions that you may have, please raise them within the chat box, but I'll invite Maja to just take us through the next step, which is the COBO.
Thanks so much, Maureen, for that. And just maybe to highlight, the annexes 1 and 2 was really to try and take some of the information that was more like tips that was sitting inside the checklist and move them out, so the checklist is a little bit lighter to go through. So I'd encourage that, especially Annex 1, you still read it alongside reading the checklist itself. And Annex 2, as it said in the heading, is for advanced programming, but that's really where, if you want to engage more in prevention activities or in actual protection responses, for example, GBV response, or if you're someone already doing that, you can drop in there and have a look at what is there, what are some of the requirements and tips that are put in. And then, of course, this is not exclusive. It's really important that you link up to other resources that exist on this, and that you collaborate with other actors that have the expertise in this. So we've set up a short COBO form, and I'll put the link in here. And I do think I'd encourage that maybe you fill it out after you have another look at the checklist, because we would really like this to be a way for us to get your feedback, to see how can we also strengthen the checklist. As I said in the very beginning, it's not a finalized version at all. I do anticipate that this should generally be a living document, so that when you have also been out and actually testing it in the programming design phases, for example, you're also able to feedback, and we can continue to update and change this, and of course make sure that the updated version is available online. So the link in the chat is for a short COBO survey. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. We basically just want to know, what is your function? How are you engaging between cash and PGI and maybe CA focal points in your national societies and out in the IFRC delegations and the regional office as well. And then if you have any specific feedback, you can also put it in there. So really highly appreciate if you will just take those 5 minutes after this meeting to fill in that form. Then let me just, it's not like I have a lot of slides left, but I just want to show real quickly, in trying to really reinforce that message around collaboration as well. So we have on the cash side, we do have a sort of a structure that you can link into. So we have these cash communities of practice, which are sub-regional structures for national societies. So I know many of you who are part of these structures are here on the call, and really happy to see you all here. I would highly encourage that maybe you invite the PGI focal points from the same national societies to come in for one of the community of practice meetings. And you can then together maybe have a discussion about how do we make this more practical? How do we take this checklist into our programming? Maybe you share experiences between the national societies peers that are in these communities of practice, so that you also learn from each other on it. So it's a really good opportunity. Most of the communities of practice have monthly meetings or bi-monthly meetings. So it would be an opportunity to say, okay, maybe in the meeting we have like plan it a bit in advance. Let's say September, we'll all meet up and each country has to come, and CASH and PGI focal point from the national society have spoken to each other in advance to try and find a good example, either of something they have done together already, or something they're planning, or something they could see in future programming on the basis of the PGI checklist, and share experiences. That's just one idea. You can do it your own ways, but now PGI focal points also know that this structure is there. So go to your CASH focal point in your national society and say, hey, could I join one of those meetings so we can actually discuss about how do we make the PGI sensitive, how do we make the CASH intervention, PGI sensitive. So of course, it's not just in this, it is also in the day-to-day programming that we're encouraging this. If your CVA focal points is someone different, bring them into the conversation. Sit down, figure out what's the way forward. Now we have 2 checklists. It's not that smart that we didn't just make one, but it's a little bit with the structures that we have 2. But right now they're quite different because we've tried as much as possible not to duplicate the CA checklist, but they're set up in the same way. So it should be quite easy for you to compile those 2 as well. So again, encouragement for you to collaborate, but do fill in the COBO as well to give us a bit of an idea of what kind of support might you need to take that forward. So we have 20 minutes left. We wanted to make sure that we had enough time for questions and feedback. So I want to start with some of the things that came in the chat. And then I think if someone wants to ask a question or has some specific feedback, we can also start raising hands. We'd like to hear other voices than just the 2 of us. So so I've noted down, I've copied in the questions. So I'll just say quickly to Eston, he's asking if there is a community-based data collection tool for PGI that national societies can use. And I've put in the chat the link to the PGI toolkit, and chapter 2 has all the tools that you need. I think it should be there. Then Yilkal had a question, I think Yilkal from Ethiopia, which I think is really good. And this is regarding the beneficiary list. And actually Yilkal is suggesting that usually they put up the beneficiary list for the beneficiaries that they intend to be targeted for everyone to see. And what do we do in the case that this is maybe a survivor-based approach where we can't really do this? So I'd say first, if you're working with SGBV survivors, and this is part of that Annex 2, unless you are the case management actor yourself, which I think it's only very few of our national societies that are actually doing direct SGBV case management, but unless you are not to really do anything with those beneficiaries other than offering a service. So typically, if we want to have SGBV survivors as part of our CASH programming, what we encourage is to set up a standard operating procedure with the SGBV actor around who is dealing with what in that case management process, how is data kept confidential, who has access to the data. And of course, that needs to be kept confidential. So the case management actor would know how to deal with this. They would already have confidential systems. So that's really an area where we as the Red Cross delivering CASH would just come in and basically deliver a service or add the SGBV survivor into our beneficiary list, but we cannot publish that. I'll say on top of that, however, that it's really important that you consult with communities before you even post the beneficiary list. So this can come with different risks. So first of all, if we look at data protection, we really discourage that you actually publish the beneficiary list, because even someone who's not a survivor can be at risk. They can be at risk of being targeted or of jealousy in their community, etc., etc. So try to work around how can we still have a community-based approach, but maybe where that list is not actually publicized, because you could put people at risk. And otherwise, it needs to be consulted actually with each and every one of them. They need to give their consent that their name can be posted somewhere in the community. So I'd always encourage trying to find other means around this than posting the beneficiary list publicly. And I know we do that a lot, but it's something that we could maybe start moving away from. All right, that was a bit of strict Maja here. I think, Maureen, I'd like to ask you a question. So there is also a question from Robi from Tanzania, where she's asking if you can elaborate on the integration of PSS and PGI in the context of beneficiary identification and service provision.
So just to explain on this, during beneficiary identification, we work towards, remember we talked about the DAPS approach, yeah? Dignity, access, participation, and safety. So we work towards ensuring that when we are reaching out to the communities that we are reaching out to, we need to identify who is within this particular community. When doing beneficiary selection, it would be good for us to have done already a gender and diversity analysis. That way, when you're coming to selecting these particular beneficiaries with the community members, we then are able to advise the community members in terms of people who may ideally left out because the communities may not be knowing of their needs or them being at risk based on the response that we have. And so when we're carrying out issues of PGI, agenda and diversity analysis is important, but also working very closely with the community members to be able to come up with a beneficiary list that is reaching out to those at risk, but also one that the community members are aware of and understand why we have come up with this particular list. I don't know whether you want the link between those two, Robbie.
Sorry, Robbie, are you still with us? Then you might want to.
No, we are still with you guys.
Yeah,
I'm with Rob here now.
Nice.
Yes, I'm here, Maja. How are you?
Nice to hear from you. So go ahead with if you want to specify your question to Maureen.
Okay. I just asked the integration of PGI and PSS. When we are doing PSS, how do we feature the PGI kind of issues?
Thanks.
And also I had to look out to see how is it PGI reporting, because most of the time PGI is integrated in the operation, and we are observing the minimum action. So once it comes to do just a reporting for PGI alone, it becomes a bit complex. We will look at to see if we can have a tool that will identify the PGI minimum actions in the operations and then to be featured out and reported separately. Otherwise, it's just an integration, just like the way we are doing with the CAs.
Yeah. Thanks, Robbie, for those two questions. I just want to start with the last question that you provided. For you to be able to report on PGI, it is important that you have also planned for PGI, because only when you plan for PGI, you're able to report on it. Of course, we work towards encouraging that a lot of integration goes on board in terms of within the different sectors, but also we do have specific PGI activities. And when you look at some of the drafts and EPOAs that we usually have, we have specific PGI activities that we usually implement within the different activities that we have. So what you need to do is work towards ensuring within your planning phase, even before you start implementation, that you already have put aside some specific PGI activities that can help you monitor in terms of where you are at on PGI. Again, within the integration within the different sectors, it's encouraging that the different sectors also get to report on some of the PGI activities that they have done. And one of the guidelines that can support this is the minimum, the link I've just shared below in terms of the minimum guidance on PGI integration, which really helps a lot in terms of each sector seeing how do I consider PGI within my work? How do I ensure that I have carried out issues of PGI? And so if they are able to utilize these particular guidelines, then it's easy for them if they're able to utilize these particular standards, then it's easy for them to also now report on PGI. Again, we do have our usual monthly reporting reporting tools that we usually share with the national societies, just for us to get what it is that national societies are doing on ground on PGI and some of the areas of support that will be required for us to also plan and come in and provide technical support. But aside from that, it will be good for you to be able to get proper reporting of PGI. You need to have already planned for it. And that's where it's easy for you to be able to capture what are some of the gaps even as you continue. In terms of PSS and how to include PGI within PSS, I'll take you back to DAPS, the DAPS framework, where we need to look at issues of dignity, access, participation, and safety. These are very paramount, especially on issues of PSS, when addressing issues of PSS. And so you need to sit and look at how best are you ensuring that whatever activities you have under PSS are addressing issues of dignity, are addressing issues of access, are addressing issues of participation, and also issues of safety. And that way, once you were able to do that, then it's easy for you to be able to see whether you've integrated PGI within PSS, and just to check that all these issues are being addressed and are being tackled. And that way, whoever is working towards PSS is able to link the same. But we are available for any technical support that may be required. In case there are any gaps that you're identifying, you don't have the capacity, we are available to provide this particular technical support, even as we continue with this.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Maureen. And maybe also just to specify if there is a need for PSS activities for an affected community, for example, again, collaborate with those people in your teams who have this speciality, you know, so maybe you set up assessment teams that are, or ideally you set up assessment teams that are joined with both cash and PGI focal points, so that if someone raises a need or acts in a way where you can see, okay, here is really a need for some kind of support for this person that goes beyond us just sitting and asking them questions, then the PGI focal point can step in and can help maybe deal with some of it on the spot, or will also be able to help make those referrals that we need back to the specific assistance. And this can be done both, as I said, on the assessment stage, or when we're out collecting beneficiary data for the identification, and during the actual cash distributions. Why not always have a PGI volunteer join the cash volunteer to do some of the work? I understand that that's of course some more resources, but find a way to set up teams that are collaborating. And again, the same on the reporting. This session is really not to say now all cash focal points has to be reporting and integrating PGI and know how to do a PGI analysis. Again, is to say we're trying to really develop something that can help PGI and cash focal points to collaborate around this. We're not going back to throwing the same or throwing multiple functions on top of one person. Of course, knowing that for some so of course we know that for some national societies it is an issue that they have to fill multiple functions. I want to take a quick question, and then we have a raised hand. So I'm saying it's quick because I think it's quite a quick answer at least, and we can elaborate more in writing as well if it's necessary. We had Michael put in the chat that most often refugees settle in host communities. How do we ensure that refugees are not at risk if you distribute cash to them? The simplest answer here is really looking at it from a social cohesion perspective, where you not only target those refugees, but you also target in the host community, because you will in almost any host community, you'll also have people that are really vulnerable. So this is also that's often a critical approach in refugee settings. Feel free to expand on the question if you want more on that. In the meantime, Boubacar, you raised a hand. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I was in fact writing in the chat. No, just wanted to say, yeah, I like the idea that it's important to have sort of an assessment team that includes PGI, CEA, and for me, you know, importantly, because my area of focus is on migration. PGI, CA is something that I feel should be integrated in what I do as a migration, you know, technical person, just to ensure that the components around CA are taken care of by the CA person, but also the PGI needs are also, you know, something that the PGI person will be able to take care of and then provide their advice to me in terms of my work around migration or responding to the issue of migration. So particularly, and very importantly, both PGI and CEA, I think, should be integrated in whatever we do as national societies in terms of our operations. This way, we'll better be able to address the needs of the vulnerable population that we're serving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Boubacar. Very, very important, and thank you for reinforcing that. I don't have other hands right now, so maybe Maureen, I think Samuel raised in the chat such an important thing. So maybe you want to actually say your answer to this in the chat or elaborate a little bit on it. So Samuel is raising an issue that talking about gender is almost always controversial when we engage with communities, especially those who, when we're talking about people who are not identifying as male or female. And he mentions, and I don't think this is just a movement thing, I've also seen it in other organizations, that we are maybe too cautious, maybe we're even sometimes very silent when it comes to talking about this, and that would impact the inclusion of these communities. And he's mentioning bisexual, intersex persons. We also have it in the checklist. We're mentioning LGBT and the need to, of course, be cautious about how we talk about it. But what do we do? Do we need to be braver when we go into the communities in terms of how we're talking about this? What's your response to this, Maureen, being the expert?
Thank you, Maja. I've actually responded some bit of it on the chat box to some, but just to say yes, I'll speak within the African context, because this is still something that most African countries are not yet open to, in terms of confirming that, yes, we do have these particular groups of people within the communities. Some countries, some governments have actually really banned this particular discussion. Some countries are silent, very silent about it. Some countries are okay with the discussion and they already have different movements being registered and such like. What I would recommend is, since we do know that these particular groups of people are within these particular communities, it is our role as humanitarians, when we are implementing activities, to be on the lookout for instances where these particular groups may be in the community and may be at risk of being left out. Of course, because of maintaining their dignity, but also their safety, we may not go identifying them and calling them and saying, hey, Maureen, I know you're a lesbian, please come forward, receive this particular service because you're a lesbian, because we will have left Maureen at risk at the end of the day in the community, because the community will now be knowing she's a lesbian, insults will go her way, or things will just happen based on the different context and how the community takes issues of LGBTQ. So what you do as a humanitarian worker is work very closely in terms of the different actors within the community, different organizations that actually support openly LGBTQ, so they're able to help you in the identification of these particular people. But also when it comes to distribution of the food, it comes to the distribution of the cash. Do not start aligning them and breaking the confidentiality and having them make one line and say, you know what, all of you come together. This is the line for LGBTQs. This is the line for persons with disability. It's working creatively to not leave them out, not leave them unsafe, and not leave them behind, but working creatively to see how best to identify them, reach out to them, take note of how they may be left out and how best you can be able to have them within your target populations, and then now be able to respond to them and be able to respond to their needs, not necessarily having to identify them as LGBTQ, based again on the different contexts that we have within the countries. But I'm not saying you leave them out. Please look out for them, be able to support them, be able to reach out to them, but also maintain their confidentiality, be able to also uphold their dignity at the end of the day, because you want to work to a point where you are not causing more harm to the community. You remember the do no harm principle? We don't want to bring more harm to that person or community. We want to ensure that they get to benefit from the service we have and live better people as opposed to the way they came in. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And let's all be gender champions and keep challenging people. I've done a protection gender assessment in South Sudan with my key focal point being someone who had 3 wives. And we had quite a lot of fun, even though he had 3 wives and I didn't agree with that. So it's possible still, but of course it's really important that if you are in communities where there is a lot of gender bias, if you're working with local volunteers, do also try to have some trainings that are addressing that gender bias, or at least making them aware that it's there. We can't make them go and divorce their 3 wives, of course, but let's try and see if we can at least have the conversation and make them aware that there might be other ways of doing it. I think we are at the end. Thank you so much both for the lively chat and the questions. We've put in again the link to the Kobo survey. This is all for you. So do go in, take 5 minutes to fill it in so we can use that feedback to strengthen the support that we can give you, and also if you have any specific feedback on the checklist, things that you think could be improved or changed or anything we missed in it, we'll be very happy to look at including that. And further up in the chat, you found the link to the checklist and the CVA checklist, the PGI toolkit. So I'll send a follow-up with, or Maureen will, let's see who it will come from, but with the video recording, with the slides, and with the different links that we've also shared throughout here. So you can go and access it all. Thanks very, very much all of you for joining. We do have our contacts, of course, we are available. Milanoy is also on here working closely with Maureen. So if there's anything, do reach out and we're happy to support or hear from you. Maureen, do you want to close us?
Thank you, Maja. Just to appreciate that everyone made to attend today's session. We do hope that you can be able to utilize this particular checklist within your different projects. We are available for support in case you'll need us to have a one-to-one session with the 3 of you. That is the PGI focal point, CEA focal point, and CVA focal point. We're very much available for that support. I know we already have one aligned in the next few weeks to be able to support, but we really look forward to seeing feedback also in terms of how the checklist is supporting you on ground, but also receiving some good reports and some lessons learned even as you continue using this checklist. Looking forward to receiving a lot of your feedback, but we'll be able to share all the materials that we've shared today. And thank you so much for your participation. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Asante sana.
Karibu. Welcome.
Bye. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.